I don't work construction, so it don't mess my work schedule up, and I don't have to walk around, slopping through the mud in old muddy boots. So, like I said, it can rain on my work and not affect me at all. But anyway, like I said, we've needed some rain, and that's a blessing. So, anyway, I was talking to Brother Paul over there about the progress at the camp. Me and my wife and Adriana went and looked at it last night. If you hadn't been over, which I mean, obviously some of y'all aren't going to see it until camp meeting, but it's coming together really, really nice back there right now. Brother Hollis is working hard. Brother Jamie, he's working, and so, anyway, but it's coming together really nice. They got most of the flooring laid down yesterday, and Brother Jamie's got the walls. It's a different kind of paneling, but it's a lot like this, and everything's painted, and I guess everything's coming together. So hopefully we'll be done by camp meeting, and won't have extension cords plugged into lights and stuff like that or anything. But anyway, like I said, once you get to see it, like I said, you'll see it's a really nice addition. My wife was asking one of the guys yesterday who'd walked over and looked at it if he'd seen it before, and he didn't understand. And she was like, "Did you see it like before they tore it all out and put the new in?" And so what if you remember what it was before? Like I said, it was fine, but now it's just so much nicer than what it was before. It'll be really nice once they get the air conditioning upstairs in the sound room for me, though. That'll be a real blessing. Anyway, if you have your Bible, turn to the book of John, chapter number 2. The book of John, chapter number 2. We're gonna bounce around a lot. We're gonna read a lot today, and it'll probably take us at least another week to get through all this right here, but that's okay. So in John chapter number 2, verse number 18, I actually read something last week, and I'll bring it up the next passage I read right here. But I read something last week about Nicodemus, and I just got to thinking about everything that Jesus did, Cody, to show them, that he was who he was, and that they rejected him anyway. They rejected him anyway, and so we're gonna look at that, over the next week and a half, 2 weeks, or whatever. But we're gonna look at that and see this. And so in verse number 18, it says, "He that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be." Oh, I'm sorry. You know what I'm reading? I'm reading John chapter 3. Sorry. John chapter number 2. Sorry. But those verses are going to apply as well. In John chapter 2, verse 18, "Then answered the Jews and said unto him, What sign showest thou unto us, seeing thou doest these things?" So when they say, "Seeing thou doest these things," in John chapter number 2, Jesus starts out in John chapter 2. He'd done his first miracle, which is turning the water into wine. But then he comes in and he flips over in verse number 13. "And the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves and changers of money, sitting. And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overthrew the tables." And so again, I mean, when Jesus come on the scene, he come on the scene, because he said in verse number in the beginning of the chapter, it says in verse number 3, and when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus said unto him, They have no wine. And Jesus said unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour's not yet come. He said, whoa, slow down here. My hour's not yet come. But right after that, he said, all right, it's time. It's time. It's time for me to show them. Because if you think about it, Jesus was 33 years old when he died, and for about 30 years of his life, there's really not a whole lot. There's not a whole lot that we see. Obviously, we read about his birth, and we read about the time that he stayed behind, and Joseph and Mary didn't know where he was. They each thought that, and he was confounding them at a young age in the temple. But other than that, we don't really see a whole lot. You don't really hear a whole lot. But once he comes on the scene, you think about all the things that Jesus did, and the very end of the book of John, it says that John believes that if everything that Jesus did, Cody, was written in a book, the world could not contain. The world could not contain. If you put pen to paper and wrote everything down that Jesus did in those three and a half years, the world could not contain the books. And so once he finally did, once it was his time, once he did open up and show them. And so in verse number 18, they said, hey, what sign? What sign showest thou? And they're like, hey, we need to see a sign. And we know the Bible says it's an evil generation that seeks a sign. But guess what? God over and over, and that's what we're going to look at this morning, God over and over and over and over and over and over again showed them signs. And they still rejected him. And so when you look right here, they said, what sign showest thou unto us, seeing thou hast done these things? Jesus answered and said unto them, destroy this temple. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then said the Jews, 46 years was this temple in building. Wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. So again, he told them right off the bat. He tells them right off the bat that they're going to destroy it, and in 3 days he's going to raise again. And it's fascinating to me that when you read the book of John, you get over to about chapter 19 verse, or chapter 20, right there when it's the resurrection, and John says, as yet they knew not the scriptures, and the disciples had walked with him over and over and over. Gil, they walked with him over and over and over and heard him speak about destroying the temple, and he was going to rebuild it. They heard him say he was going to have to suffer and that he was going to be killed, and yet they missed it, Cody. And I've often thought about it, as I read the Bible and been in church for years. I thought, I wonder what I've missed, Brother Tyrone. I wonder what I've missed. It was as plain as day, Brother Croft, that he said, even as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. He said it over and over and over again. But even though he said it over and over again, even the disciples missed it. Even they didn't understand. And yet here Jesus starts out his ministry by saying, hey, look, he said, here's your sign you're going to see. Here's your sign you're going to see. And I didn't mean to read chapter 3, verse number 18, but those verses apply. Those verses apply because even in chapter number 1, it talks about how light came into the world and men loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. They had light, they saw the light, but yet they rejected the light, and so they couldn't see. And so in chapter number 3, verse number 1, again, very familiar passage. I read it last week, but it says, there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. The same came to Jesus by night and said unto him, Rabbi, you'll see it, Rabbi is master. Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God. So I'm going to say right there, again, he did not say, I know. Cody, just remember who he is, who his friends are. Again, you know what I mean? Again, who you associate with. If you say we, then I'm going to assume it's the people you're associating with. You know what I mean? If Cody calls me from work and said, "Hey, we were talking," I'm not gonna assume it's gonna be anybody but loose construction crew that y'all were talking. You know what I mean? I mean, it's who you associate. It's who you associate with. That's who I'm gonna assume when you say we. When you say we, that's who you're talking about. And so, you know, sometimes my wife will call and say, "Hey, well, you know, we are wondering what we're going to eat for supper." And I'm like, "Well, guess what? You're not the only one wondering what we're going to eat for supper. I've been wondering what we're going to eat for supper." And so, you know, it's her and the kids. I'm like, "Hey, what are we doing? What are we doing for supper? What are we eating for supper?" And so so here's Nicodemus, and he comes to Jesus and he says, "We know. We know." And so guess what? The Pharisees knew, and I know I mentioned this last week, the Pharisees knew. I believe they knew who they were killing. I believe they knew who they were killing. We're going to get to it, I believe, next week. But they knew who they were killing. And yes, they tried to justify it. They're like, "Well, we have a law. You know, he made himself he made himself the Son of God. We have this law." But guess what? They also wanted to kill Lazarus. And what did Lazarus do? The only thing he did was he was raised from the dead. But because many people were believing on Jesus because of Lazarus, they said, "Hey, we might have to do away with not just Jesus, but we ought to do something with Lazarus too." Because they knew that many people were believing, and we're gonna see how that these people, they loved the praise of men more than of God. They didn't. They wanted their religion, they wanted their power, they wanted their prestige, and there was nothing that Jesus could do to change their mind. And even though they knew they were wrong, even though they knew who they were killing, they said, "I'd rather kill him anyway and see what happens." And so Nicodemus comes and he said, we know we know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man. They said, "Look, you know, I mean, it's indisputable. There is no way, we cannot dispute." Now, it's funny that Nicodemus, which I personally believe that Nicodemus got saved, but it's funny that Nicodemus comes to him, and so these discussions had to have taken place. These discussions had to have taken place. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, here are these Pharisees, here are these rulers of the Jews, and they're sitting around and they're like, "Hey," and we're going to read it in another passage, but it's basically like, "Hey, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this?" You know, and some, you know, and the Bible says, you know, some said he's a good man, some said he has a devil, some said he deceiveth the people. Again, there was an argument. There was an argument. But in the argument, they had to acknowledge, you know, I tell you what, I mean, as long as it's just us, you know, I mean, again, you know, I mean, sometimes your pride keeps you from doing certain things. But sometimes if it's just us and this doesn't get out of the room, you're right. But I'm telling you, when we go outside this room, if you bring it up when we go outside this room, I'm not saying you're right. You know what I mean? But sometimes just your pride says, "Look, you know, inside that room with the Pharisees, Brother Croft, I think they said, I tell you what, only someone from God could do these miracles. Only someone from God that come from God could do the miracles that he's doing." But once they walked out of that room and walked back and walked into the temple, walked wherever, they said, "This man, he deceiveth the people. He deceiveth the people." And even though they knew why, because he was pulling people away from their old religion into what God wanted them to come into, which, you know, God was transitioning them. God was changing things. Even though that was the intention from the beginning, that Jesus, you know, I mean, he was the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. That was always the intention, to get to this place. But now that they're coming to this place, the Jews are like, oh no, we don't. Oh no, we don't. No. And so he says, we know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. Now, at this moment in time, at this very moment, Nicodemus didn't understand everything. We're gonna see that he didn't understand it. Or I'm not going to read anymore right here, but we know from the passage that he did not understand, because Jesus says you must be born again, and he's like, what? Can a man enter the second time into his mother's womb and be born? And Jesus explains to him. He gives him the gospel, and he tells him. He said, he asked him. He said, you're a ruler of the Jews, and you don't understand these things. You don't understand, but Nicodemus was on the right path. He was on the right path because he looked, and he was humble enough. He was humble enough to say, I tell you what. Something about this man is different. Something about this man is different. Something about him is different. The things that he's doing, we can say all we want to that it's not of God, but when we look at what he done, the only conclusion to the matter is he came from God. That's the only conclusion. That's the conclusion that Nicodemus is going to come to. And all those other Pharisees, I believe personally that they came to that conclusion and they said, nah, not going to believe. I believe they came to that conclusion and they said, well, we have a choice. And I think salvation's that way. I think salvation, you come up to the point of salvation and then you have a choice. And you either accept it and repent and believe, or you say, no, not for me. It's not for me. And I think a lot of people get all the way up, just like the rich young ruler. I think they get all the way up to the point, and then they're like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. I can't do it. I don't want it bad enough. I've got something else that I want more than that, and if I have to give up that to get, which it sounds crazy for us, if I have to give up whatever to get eternal life, well, I'd rather keep whatever than have eternal life. And maybe I'll get another chance. Maybe I'll get another chance. Maybe on my deathbed. Maybe on my deathbed, when I figure, that the average life expectancy is somewhere in the 70s for men now, and a little bit higher for women. Maybe when I'm in my 70s, then I'll think about it. You don't have that luxury. You don't have that luxury. We don't have that luxury. We don't know, I mean, we could walk right out there to my left right there, walk out and walk through those markers and do the math and realize there's a lot of people out there that are younger than us. Younger than us. They're out there, and they didn't expect, I'm sure, most of them on the morning they woke up, that was going to be their last morning to wake up. I don't think they said, tell you what, today'd be a good day to die. I don't think people do that. But you get up, you go about your business, you have a heart attack, you have a stroke, you have a car wreck, you have whatever. You have whatever. I mean, some people have long drawn out illnesses and they realize, my father-in-law, which I don't think he realized, I think it may have been like a week. It may have only been about a week. I mean, y'all remember, he was in here teaching, he was in here teaching Sunday school, and I took him over to the camp there for the Thanksgiving meeting to go to the prayer room, and I think it was right about that time when he finally realized, again, that's Thanksgiving meeting. I took him to the prayer room, and he decided, and he passed away December 9th. I think it was all, he's already on hospice care. He's already on hospice care, and he's planning on going to meetings. and stuff. And I don't think he realized, and even, even some people that have long drawn out illnesses, I don't even think they realize, Brother Wayne. But eventually, if the Lord doesn't come back, we're all going to die. We don't know when. We don't know when. And so it behooves us to not reject the message thinking we're going to get another chance. And so here's Nicodemus, and they had this conversation. Like I said, I believe there was a private conversation among the Pharisees. And Nicodemus said, I got some questions. I've got questions. I've got questions, and because I have these questions, who better to ask than the person we're talking about? I don't want to hear this other Pharisee's opinion. I don't want to hear this other Pharisee's opinion. I don't want to hear this other Pharisee's opinion about Jesus. I'm just going to go talk to Jesus. I'm just going to go ask him. I'm just going to go ask him and say, hey, I just got some questions. And I don't think he expected the answer that he got, but because Jake, he was humble enough that when Jesus said it to him, again, he's like, whoa, wait a second, I wasn't expecting that. But like I said, because of what we read throughout the book of John, I believe that Nicodemus eventually got saved. I believe that he eventually got saved. Now there were a lot of Pharisees, and we talked about this last week. There are a lot of people that believed. I read it last week in John 8. There are a lot of people that believed, but as soon as Jesus confronted them, they said, wait a second, whoa, we've never been in bondage. We've never been in bondage. And so there were people that believed. They saw him, and they saw the miracles, and they saw what he did, and they heard his words, and they believed. But just because you believe in God, just because you believe in Jesus, doesn't make you saved. It doesn't make you saved. And so there's more to it than that. But so what I want us to do is turn our Bibles over to Matthew chapter number 8, and we're just going to look at that all the things, and I say, it's not all. We're going to look at some of the things, some of the miracles, not just that Jesus come and said, hey, I am my Father one. Not just saying I come from heaven. Not even the testimony of John from John chapter number 1, which is behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. Not even the testimony. And Jesus tells them one time, he said, if you don't believe my words, well, examine my works. If you don't believe my words, look at the things that I do, and then ask yourself, is this the Christ, or is this not the Christ? And so in Matthew chapter number 8, verse number 1, and I just chose Matthew 8, Matthew 9, just because there's so many miracles in here, just bam, 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 one after another, instead of having to bounce y'all around all over the place. But in Matthew chapter number 8, verse number 1, it says, when he came down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. And behold, there came a leper, and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, saying, I will. Be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Now again, for most of Jesus' miracles, they were public miracles. They were miracles that anyone that was there could see. Anyone that was there, anyone that was in the crowd, whether friend or foe, he didn't just do miracles. It was like, hey, look, I can't do any miracles right now because the Pharisees are watching. I can't do any miracles because the chief priest is watching. I can't do any miracles because the Sadducees are here. I can't do any. No, Jesus did public miracles, and those public miracles were to convince them that he was that light. That he was the light from heaven. And so here's a miracle. And again, like I said, what is it recorded? One other time in the Bible? One other time in the Bible where a leper was cleansed? Again, you get in pretty rare company, I know Brother Wayne played softball. And when you start talking about the only time something's ever been done, or it's only been done one other time, you're in pretty rare company. You're in pretty rare company. I mean, again, I don't think anyone's hit 800 home runs yet. And there's just a couple people that have hit 700 home runs. And one of them, was sure, injected himself with a lot of stuff to get to that place. But you understand, I mean, you're pretty rare company when it's just a few people over 100 and some years, however long baseball has been in existence, 140 years now or whatever. But you think about for all of eternity, maybe only one other time a leper has been cleansed, that it was recorded. And here Jesus steps on the scene, and he just, and this leper comes up to him, and we're going to see, as we read these miracles, we're going to see over and over and over again, it is all about faith. It's all about faith. It is all about believing. Because Jesus, here's a man that came to Jesus and said, and put in verse number 2, and behold, there came a leper and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. So somewhere, somehow, this leper, not this extremely religious man, not this man that was extremely learned in the scriptures and should have been able to read the Old Testament and understand that the Messiah was coming, and that when he came, he was going to do these miracles. But here's just a man that is a leper, and he has no hope, Cody. He has no hope of recovering from his leprosy. And he hears about Jesus, and he comes to Jesus, and he said, hey, if you will, you can make me clean. Just that simple. Just that simple. And in verse number 3, and Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, saying, I will. It was that simple. Here's a man that believed. Here's a man that believed, and he expressed his belief. Because, again, I think a lot of times people believed, but for fear of the Jews, for fear of what was going to happen to them, they wouldn't express their belief. And so, again, like I said, I think you come to a point, just like in salvation, you come to a point where it's either I'm gonna go all the way, or I'm just going to be close. And so this man said, you know what? What do I got to lose? What do I have to lose? And so he said, hey, the Jews can't do anything for me. The Pharisees can't do anything for me. The chief priests couldn't do anything for me. The only thing he could say is if I were clean, he can pronounce me clean, but he can't make me clean. The doctors can't do anything for me, but here is this man, and I'm hearing about his miracles, and so I'm just going to go to him and say, hey, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus said, I will. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And so here's a miracle. And again, like I said, you ever been skeptical? Yeah, if you're like me, it's part of my nature. I am a skeptic by nature. And so if you tell me something, I'll be like, nah, whatever. I'm probably not. You're going to have to bring some facts with you when you come. If you just tell me something randomly, then I'm just going to be like, whatever. But if you bring facts with you, then all right, prove yourself, and then I'll believe you. But if you just come to me and say something, then I'm going to be like, I'm going to see it for myself. I don't want to say I'm like Thomas, like, hey, look, unless I see him, I'll stick my hands, in the wounds. I'm not believing it. I don't want to say I'm that far, but I am a skeptic at heart. But Jesus came to prove the skeptics wrong. And anyone that was there and was watching right here should have been able to say, whoa, wait a second. There's something different about this guy. There's something very different about this guy. There's something very different that someone with leprosy, and we know this is not the only time that Jesus cleansed the leper. He cleansed the 10 lepers. But someone with leprosy comes to Jesus, and as simple as saying, I will. be thou clean. And immediately, I mean, again, and leprosy was something that it wasn't just a condition of the heart. It wasn't that it wasn't just a condition that you had some internal infirmity. Let's say you had arthritis or something, and it hurts you, but no one can see you have arthritis unless you have it really bad, where it like crinkles up your fingers or whatever. But I mean, leprosy was something that physically you could see someone had. And because physically you could see someone had, when they don't have it anymore, and it happened immediately, there was no question. There should have been no question that Jesus cleansed this leper. In verse number 4, and Jesus saith unto him, See thou tell no man, but go thy way, show thyself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded for testimony unto them. And again, it's funny how I think a lot of things that God did in the Old Testament, He did in the Old Testament, but it was there so that when Jesus came on the scene, it helped prove who Jesus was. The fact he told this leper, the leper's already cleansed, but he said, hey, I want you to go to the priest. Why? Because you go to the priest who's a skeptic, and the priest says, wait a second, I know you. I had to proclaim you were a leper. I had to proclaim you were a leper. I had to banish you. I had to send you out of the camp. I had to send you out so that you lived in the leper colony. I know you. By now your fingers should have been falling off. By now these things should have been happening to you. Well, how are you whole? And he had to say, well, let me tell you my story. Let me tell you my testimony. Let me tell you about the time that God touched me. Let me tell you about the time that I'd come to the end of my rope. I didn't have anything left. The only thing I had left was to just lay down and die. And I said, you know what? I got nothing left. And I heard about this man named Jesus. And I went to this man named Jesus. And I said, if thou wilt, thou canst make me whole. And Jesus said, I will. And immediately, look at me. You can't dispute it. I'm whole. And so again, like I said, I think God instituted things in the Old Testament where they had to go to the priest to be declared clean. I think God instituted that so that when Jesus came on the scene and Jesus did these miracles and he took them to the people that he knew were going to be the most skeptical. And one day, if they got saved, they'll say, you know what, I was a skeptic for a long time. But this is the miracle that he did where I said, you know what, I can't deny it anymore. But there's going to be others that said, I saw every miracle. I saw every single miracle he did. I saw lepers cleansed. I saw the dumb speak. I saw the blind that couldn't see. We're going to read that later. The blind that had never saw and now they could see. I saw people that couldn't walk that had an infirmity 38 years. I saw all these things, and then I said, no, I don't think so. I mean, doesn't it? I mean, just, and again, like I said, I hadn't even worked my way down through the miracles yet, but it just sounds so ridiculous to me. Even the most skeptical person, Brother Croft, even the most skeptical person should have said, well, I'll tell you what, I mean, and they even say it, I mean, if Christ cometh, is he going to do more miracles than this man does? They even say it. They say it out loud. They say it out loud. They're like, if Christ comes, is he going to do any more miracles? Like what other miracle can he do? And so in verse number 5, and when Jesus entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion beseeching him and saying, Lord, my servant lieth at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. And Jesus saith unto him, I will come and heal him. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but speak the word. only, and my servant shall be healed. For I am a man under authority, having soldiers under me, and I say to this man, go, and he goeth, and to another, come, and he cometh, and to my servant, do this, and he doeth it. And when Jesus heard it, he marveled, and said to them that followed, verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. And I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west, and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. There shall be weeping, gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said unto the centurion, go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so be it done unto thee. And his servant was healed in the selfsame hour. And so you see right here that here again is Jesus, and here's this man. This man comes to Jesus, and he has a request, and it was not a simple request. He's like, hey, this man is grievous. He's grievously tormented. He's got this palsy, and he's grievously tormented. And he comes to Jesus, and we're talking early on in Jesus' ministry. But he hears about Jesus, and he says, you know what? I believe. I believe. I believe. I've heard. Again, like I said, I mean, I don't know how many miracles he's done to this point. I don't know how many miracles he's done to this point. But after the first one, someone had to say, hey, if he can do one, he can do another. And after the second one, someone said, hey, he's done two. Can he not do another? And again, like I said, I mean, in this part, it's a simple matter of faith. It's a simple matter of faith. It's a simple matter of believing, but they had to confess their belief. They had to confess their belief. And so they come to Jesus and they're like, hey, I have this problem and I believe you can fix it. And Jesus said, you're right, I can. And I will. In verse number 14, and when Jesus was come into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laid and sick of the fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and ministered unto them. And so again, it's just miracle after miracle after miracle. And in verse number 23. But Jesus said in verse number 20, and when he had entered into a ship, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves, but he was asleep. And his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. And he saith unto them, why are ye so fearful? And again, like I said, I mean, not only were miracles done for lost people, but miracles were done for the disciples so that it would increase their faith. It would increase their faith. And there are a lot of times that they missed an opportunity. They missed an opportunity to show their faith. Peter missed a great opportunity. You say, well, he's the only one that got out of the boat. And that's true, but he got out there, and then he got to looking at the wind and the waves, and he started to sink, and he had to cry out. I mean, he had enough faith to get out of the boat, Brother Tyrone. I wish he had enough faith to just walk all the way to Jesus. But you understand that Jesus did things. He allowed things. He allows things in our life. God allows things to happen in our life so that we can choose. It can increase our faith, and then we can choose to trust him more. And the next time it occurs, instead of being like, oh, I don't know whether I'm going to get through this, you can look and say, I tell you what, God, you've done it before. You can do it again. You've done it before. You've done it before. Again, like I said, anyone who was a leper, should have been like, hey, you've cleansed the leper before. What about me? Hey, you cleansed 10 lepers. What about me? Would you not be a what about me? And instead of just being stuck in your sickness. And so it says, he said, why are ye so fearful? He said, you're with me. You're with me, and I'm going to take care of you. Why are you so afraid? I've got this. I'm asleep. It's not even waking him up. Now, I wasn't in the Navy, and I've never been on a big ship. And so I don't understand all this, you know, I've been out, you know, I don't even want to call it deep sea fishing, but I've been out in the Gulf fishing, and you start hitting some waves and stuff, and that boat, I mean, it really gets to shaking you around. And so, but here's Jesus, and no doubt, I mean, that boat was getting tossed all over the place, and I'm sure they were fighting the boat terrible. But Jesus was down there sound asleep. And so all he was looking for, Gil, was someone to come down and say, Master, we can't handle it, but we know you can. We can't handle it, but we know you can. But Jesus said, why are you so fearful? O ye of little faith. O ye of little faith. Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. Verse 27. But the men marveled, saying, what manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Now we're not talking about lost people. We're talking about Cody right here. We're talking about his disciples. Even his disciples had to learn. Even his disciples had to learn. Every time Jesus did something else, it increased their faith. It increased their faith that much more to say, there's nothing he cannot do. There's nothing impossible with God. There's nothing impossible with Jesus. There's not one thing that if we brought him up to and said, God, this is an impossible situation, and he'd say, it's not impossible with me. It's not impossible with me, because I can handle it. And so over and over and over, and we're going to get into it next week, but some more. But over and over, these miracles were done so people could see. They were not done privately. They were not hidden. They were done out in the open. And even on something like this, where it was just his disciples with him, there's no way they could keep that quiet, Cody. There's no way they could keep that quiet. There was no way once they made it to land, they didn't say, I tell you what, you ain't going to believe what happened last night. You're not going to believe what happened last night. We were out there on the water, and we've been, a bunch of us have been fishermen, but it's never been a storm like that before, and it was the worst storm we've ever been in, and we fought the boat, and Jesus was down there asleep, and all he had to do was just speak the word. Just spoke a word. And the wind said, and the sea said, just speak the word. And so, again, Jesus did miracles for people to see so that they would believe. And I'm going to flip over because I got a few more minutes. Actually, not even flip over. Matthew chapter number 9. In verse number 1, it says, he entered in a ship and passed over and came into his own city. And behold, they brought to him a man sick of the palsy, lying on a bed. And Jesus, seeing their faith, said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer. He said, boy, let me tell you, it's a good day for you. It's a good day for you. And it wasn't even his faith this time, Cody. It wasn't even the man that was sick's faith. It was the other men that brought him to Jesus. And they said, look, if we can just get you to Jesus, you're going to see that he can fix you. I mean, when you go on church visitation, is that not what church visitation is? If we can just get you to see Jesus, if we can get you in church, if we can get you to hear the preaching, if we can get you to hear the gospel, you're going to see that God can fix you. God can change you. God can make a new person out of you. God can take something that's so filthy and so dirty and so vile and clean it up and change it. Is that not what church visitation is? Hey, we want you to come to church, but we don't just want you to come to church. We want you to see Jesus. We want you to come to church and come and sit in church and say, man, these people are different. Why are these people different? And then you hear their testimonies, you're like, wait a second. They were just like me. I am what they used to be. And so if God does to me what he did for them, then I can be like them. And so here is this man that he's sick of the palsy. He said, son, be of good cheer. And again, I love it, which, if you know me very well, you know my personality. It doesn't bother me to mess with people, and it doesn't bother me to be messed with. Brother Jamie, he played a joke on me the other day. I don't know if some of y'all were in the van with him, but he thought it was Bub, and he was just laying on the horn. He was following me, just laying on the horn, following me. I bet he went 2 miles down the road laying on the horn. And when we got over to the tent meeting, Brother Jamie realized it was me, and he come over and said, "I'm so sorry." I'm sorry. "All right, Brother Jamie, it's all right. It's all good. I didn't even think nothing about it." But Jesus messed with the Pharisees. He messed with them. He pushed their buttons. He pushed their buttons on a continual basis. Look what he does. They brought a man sick of the palsy. They weren't talking about sin. They brought a man who was sick. And Jesus said, he said, "Son, be of good cheer. Thy sins be forgiven thee." And Cody, he was messing with the Pharisees right there. He said, "Thy sins be forgiven thee." And he's going to heal him. He's going to heal him in a second. But them Pharisees, they were not happy. They're like, "Whoa, wait a second here. Only God can forgive sins." Jesus said, "You're right. Yeah, you're right. Only God can forgive sins. Only God can forgive sins." And guess what? I just forgave him. Thank y'all. We'll start next week.